Welcome to the Justified dashboard. The purpose of this video is to go over lab user setup. By now, we have done the original implementation process and have set you up based on your preferences inside of your lab with you when we met with you either via telephone or in person. Today's video is to go over the lab settings and preferences for when you need to make changes after the assessment we've already done in our initial launch needs to change. So this will be adding new users, adding new roles, changing your potential profile, and also messing with your lab preferences to get the exact type of specimens that you want inside your laboratory. First, in the lab profile, basically what you're setting up is just your demographics of the lab. The name, potential logo you want to add, phone and email, taxpayer ID, and a whole list of other demographic information that is not mandatory. The only thing mandatory on this page are the red asterisk items. Once the lab profile has been set up, basically you can go ahead and choose your lab roles. Basically, we've already set up lab roles inside the system that are hard-coded, if you will, and they're built in. So you really don't have to mess with lab roles as much. Lab users is where you would go and add new users. So again, by now, most of the people in lab ownership or operations have been set up by us alongside you so that you can learn pretty quickly. This is for any new users you'd like to add. Here's where you just set up a new user. Add the username, add the first and last name, add their email that they'd like the activation link sent to, and along with the password. You can generate a random password or enter one manually here. As far as roles go for these new users, basically everybody's either going to be a lab user admin or a lab full admin. Lab full admins have total visibility. Lab user admins have just a little bit less visibility in some case and can't mess with some of the preferences upon setup. So in this case, the lab user admin would be most of the people who are employees of the laboratory. Lab ownership would have more of the lab full admin, if you will. This is the super user inside of the lab selection. Finally comes lab preferences, which are critical to the system. Here's where essentially you tell the system what the type of samples you want to receive for each accepted ancillary. So in this case, PGX. You would choose here the accepted ancillaries that you offer. So in this case, let's just choose PGX. I would then dive into insurance specifications. Here's where we tell the system, again, if you remember upon implementation, is where we set up the in-network and out-of-network deductible thresholds that you'd like to set up. So what are you comfortable with accepting at your laboratory from an unmet deductible perspective on the in-network and the out-of-network phase? So if you're comfortable with accepting, in this case, an in-network deductible of $500 or less, then that's the system you would set up for the respective in-network payers that you've set up also. So here's where you determine which payers are you in network with, which you're out of network with, and which payers do you not accept. Over 1,000 trading partners right now inside the system and continuing to grow. Once you've determined your lab threshold deductible, then you would then determine the cash price that you're comfortable with accepting. So in this case, if the in-network deductible for a patient was $501 or more, the system would then display, if you'd like, the cash price for this accepted ancillary, in this case PGX, of $199. So let's say Betty Smith walks into the door, her deductible for in-network payer is $1,000, which means it exceeds the threshold. The user would then be told to ask Betty if she'd like a cash price that the lab has set up of $199 for this respective service. And these are where you set up your preferences. Obviously, these are ultimately your decisions to make. You're basically just telling the system which are you comfortable with. Then you'd also select the individual genes, again, in this case for pharmacogenetics, along with custom panels. In this case, a panel has already been set up. And you'd be able to choose of the custom panels which genes you'd like to be placed in there. So in this case, if you'd like CYP2C19 and 2C9 be a part of one panel called Laboratory's Best Panel, then you would simply just add your genes over here and label your panel here, and then save that. And that would be added up here along with the pain panel that's already been created. Finally is to add yellow light logic. In this case, you're basically telling the system when a pair logic isn't exactly met, then are we still feel comfortable accepting from a medical justification perspective to give this patient access to this test? Again, the physician can always override any system's preferences, but in this case, you'd like to tell the patient, okay, we need the patient to be considering taking or currently taking these drugs and also have one of these buckets of pharma history in order to grant a yellow light. So basically, our system works off of a red, yellow, and green light logic, as you already know. Here is the yellow light preferences that you'd like the system to trigger. Anything that's not a yellow or a green, which means it meets direct payer policy, will ultimately be a red light, and it'll stop the requisition or ask the doctor if they'd like to override the system itself. Once everything has been saved inside of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buckets, you've now completed the lab preferences section. This can always be changed, and it will always be saved until the next change happens. So you can continue to modify this process in order to make your lab as efficient as possible.